Hi, welcome to episode number 8 of the Better Conversations podcast. We speak to the leaders of today so that the leaders of tomorrow can be inspired, enriched, and better than those who came before them. Today I am with Sampson. He is a proud husband and a father of 3. He is also a champion for more introverted leadership in the world, and as an illustrator, Lee communicates empowering messages of leadership through the use of his unique art. Hi Lee, how are you doing today?
Very good, thank you, Tavian. That's a fantastic introduction. Doing much better after that, thank you.
That's okay. So we jump straight into it here, and today I'm just going to ask you about the 3 pivotal moments that you sort of had in your life to get you to where you are today. And I know one of the main pivotal moments that you speak about is coming from a single parent household. It would be good to take the audience through that story and I guess let them know how it impacted your leadership and also how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So as you mentioned, so my environmental factors starting out when I was younger, raised by my mother, and I was the older brother, so I had a younger sibling, guy. And I think I love the way the dynamics of what shapes people and how they turn out uniquely and differently. Yeah. And for me, I think in that starting in that position from a young age, my mother and father separated when I was 2. So from a very young age, I was hearing a lot that, you're the oldest son, you need to look after your mum and your brother. So that had a big influence on my early thinking and probably what I think leadership should be. So it's kind of that caring approach to people. And I guess I was lucky in a lot of ways in that my mum turned out to be a fantastic role model anyway for leadership. So she started her own business and she continually evolved and grew, and she managed as well. So I was kind of lucky that there was an expectation in some aspects that I'd step into leadership in a family aspect a little earlier, but also that I had a fantastic role model already in my mother, who was doing a fantastic job. And I think if I may just chuck one more point on that, I think that being raised by my mother and my grandmother had a sort of a nurturing approach as well. It kind of brings out a more of a softer, nurturing, caring approach to leadership. And that's kind of naturally followed through later on in life when I've led and managed teams. It's kind of getting to understand people as people and digging that a little bit deeper and caring about them as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you touched on the point of your mum sort of starting her own business. I mean, what are some of the qualities that you saw in her while she was doing that? I mean, it must have been really hard for her to do that just by herself, with obviously, 2 kids as well. What are some of the qualities that you really pulled away from that?
So I think that overcoming challenges. So I think adaptability is a big part or plays part in people's success, and the ability to be able to adapt to situations, both good and bad. So what I observed setting up the business and running a business as a solo mum is having to work lots of hours and do a lot yourself, and balance that out with being the sole caregiver as well. I guess it shows that you can do both. You can be busy and professional, but you can still bring that caring, nurturing side as well. You don't need to have one or the other, which I think in your introduction you talked about the new leadership coming through and the new changes. I think that's important change in the way that we look at the way that we manage and lead people, is bringing that, yes, it's business and we need to have a return on investment, but we're also doing this business for people and by people, and having that caring, people-centric approach, I think brings out the best in people.
That's a really good point you made about sort of having a people-centric approach. What's, I guess, one of the biggest things that you think's blocking that people-centric approach today, in the way we run business?
So that's a tough one. So I think I alluded to at the beginning of my first point, potentially environmental being an impact on me. So my environment helped me be more empathetic and more nurturing. To answer your question, I think I focus on empathy and what it means to be empathetic, and understanding that is a valuable professional skill to develop and deserves a seat at the table. I think that's probably the biggest one for me. And there's a growing awareness of that, that, that people produce better results and thrive in cultures and communities where they do feel cared about, their needs feel cared about, and they do feel a part of that.
Yeah. Great. So if we move on to, I guess, pivotal moment number 2, which is something that you normally speak about as well, which is the private school and how that impacted your life. So would you like to go deeper into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you can edit what you want from this, but I'm a big fan of just being open and honest. So when I was about 9 or 10, and my mum was running her business, which involved her working weekends, etc. Myself, my brother, and a friend who was the same age as my brother, so younger. So I guess I was the oldest one. We went down to the local school to play, which was pretty common in those days. So I was grew up in the 70s and 80s, so running around the local school as a playground was pretty normal. What transpired is I managed to figure out a way to get into the school while it was still locked, and that led to a weekend of doing that to the local school. And once I'd figured out the trick, to the community hall and the local sports hall as well. And we were only 9 or 10, and there wasn't a lot of consequence or thought of what was going on. So we took plans, etc. So long story short, we obviously got caught because we were young, and we turned up with things that we shouldn't have. And that really shook my mother. I think she felt a lot of pressure as a single mother that, at the age of 9 or 10, that her oldest son and other son were doing things that were obviously socially unacceptable, and probably worried that she had impacted that. So she worked really hard, metaphorically and literally, pretty much bankrupted herself to send myself and my brother to a private school in New Zealand. So it's a public school in the UK. And the reason I mentioned that earlier when we were talking about impacts on my leadership journey is that early indoctrination into a private school and the way that institutionalized sort of process works helped me better understand the communication that's required and the cultural practices and processes that enable you to interact or be perceived as belonging to a club, for lack of a better word. Probably danced all around that one poorly. I could try rephrasing that again. I think that the impact of the private school education on myself was absolutely on the way that I communicate and the way that I talk and the way that I interact, because part of that education was the cultural assimilation of words and cultural practices, etc., that make you more easily identifiable as being a part of an educated group or an educated society, and that in turns opens doors for you further down the track. I think that stands worth mentioning, because I think that language and communication is a big impact, or has a big impact on the way that we're perceived and the opportunities that we get in life. So the opportunity to be able to go to an institution where I learnt the phrases and the language and the practices and the words, etc., helped me further down the track.
And I guess that's a really interesting one as well, that even though your mum had to work extremely hard, obviously that situation then put you into an opportunity really, where you were able to actually, make more of your life or change the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely.
I wonder sort of what do you say to, people who potentially might feel that they may not have the opportunity. So, for example, for me and people where I come from East London, I know that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to maybe go to a private school. And a lot of the time as well, I know that private school, the kids actually get a good opportunity to do extracurricular because their parents can afford it, which is something that people in my community don't necessarily or weren't able to do, which meant that the time that they go outside of school was generally doing bad things and getting up to no good. So I guess the question is, especially going around sort of that caring and nurturing leadership, what's some of the things that we can do to really help people who might feel that they don't have the best opportunities?
So I'll lead into that question by circling back to the private school thing. So one of the biggest learnings for me, apart from the communication and the language and getting assimilated a little bit more, or being more comfortable in that environment, because I think it's being comfortable in that environment, feeling like you don't belong, is probably an answer to that question. One of the impacts of going to that school is I definitely didn't feel like I belong, and it continued that ongoing importance of care and importance of diversity, because it really highlighted that difference between, and this is an oversimplification, but the haves and the have-nots, or people that have more opportunities. It becomes apparent in that environment. So my mum struggled to get us into that school, and it was very apparent that we were different from everybody else, our peers. Socioeconomically, there were differences. My answer to your question is that I think that the internet and online learning has opened up the opportunity for anybody to get the hard knowledge and skills, and that's access to anybody. That's not going to hold anybody back. I think what holds people back in my experience. So what I've loved the most is in my leadership as I've progressed higher up is identifying people who have the leadership talent, potentially not seen in that light because of the frame, and that's potentially around the language or the way they talk or the way they interact. I always have like to talk to them about communication, how important it is, how sounding and like the people that you want to hang out with is important at every facet of human interaction. So you think about football fans, or you think about music fans or literary fans, and they have a certain lingo and a certain language. I have gotten to understand the importance of being open to broadening your communication skills to match whoever it is that you're talking to. So to answer your question in a roundabout kind of way, I said, I think you can get the knowledge and the education and the opportunities if you're driven, and that there are plenty of mentors and sponsors out there, but I think it's also associating and being able to get access or mentors in that crowd so you can start to communicate and use the language where the place that you want to go to talk and sound the same. That'll make you feel better. It'll make them where you're going feel better, like you belong, and that's what opens the doors. I'm sorry that took a long way to get there.
That's completely fine.
But I think, genuinely, I think language and communication words is what people use to identify or label us and either provide or hold back opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful point, actually, because when I went to my sort of sixth form, that's what we call it here, so after secondary school, they were running sort of literature classes and actually being able to speak to literature classes, and also I forgot what they're called, but where they teach you how to speak sort of the Queen's English.
Elocution,
which is something that I definitely didn't have. And they said that actually one of the main reasons why a lot of people didn't land places in sort of Oxford and Cambridge was because of that. And private schools and private school students were learning how to speak sort of correctly and had the right grammar all the way from sort of reception, sort of 5-6 years old, all the way up, which is something that you don't get. So that's definitely a powerful point of being able to communicate effectively, and definitely, as you said, communicate the right things to the people that you're actually trying to win, I guess, or So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I've worked in both kitchens and in the corporate world, and the communication's very different in both. And I had to learn after 10 years of talking one way in kitchens where it's important and things are just as important, but you can't have, even though there's the same urgency in corporate world, you can't talk the same. I guess that's being mindful of the situation and learning the,
Great.
yeah.
So I guess the final pivotal moment that we can go into, which is landing your first management role. Tell us a little bit about that and how it came about.
So the final opportunities to leadership for me, this initial role and the ones that came after, I've always generally started at an entry level position in the management roles have kind of come up after that. So my initial management role, ironically, I started university and I went for a year, but I didn't finish. So my first role was when they discovered that I wasn't going to continue my university education. They asked if I'd like to step in and manage. And the first role in management is probably like a lot of people's roles, and like leadership and management's no different from anything else, is that you have to make a lot of mistakes along the way before you get better at it. And almost like any other task you'd like to do in the world, whether it's driving or chess or darts, invariably your baby steps are full with lots of mistakes and lots of learnings. So I made all the mistakes, the classical mistakes along the way, which is I was a staff member first, now I'm a manager now, and I must treat people differently and they must treat me differently. I think what really opened my mind and the biggest opportunity I got was when I moved from the hospitality world, so chefing and baking and kitchens, into the corporate world. So I went into finance, into a bank, was the investment they put in learning more about leadership and leadership development. And for me, that's the piece of the puzzle, I think, that a lot of people get into leadership positions and are so overwhelmed with the day-to-day operational tasks of leading and the trickiness that comes with leading people, that the continual leadership and leadership development and growth of the skills takes a back seat. And so the biggest impact for me in that management role at the bank was the investment in putting me through leadership courses, which circles it back a little bit to the private education. Does this mean that you need to be in opportunities to get this access to knowledge? And historically, I'd say potentially, but now with the internet, not so much. So I've continued that journey of leadership, learning and discovery, and LinkedIn, and looking for opportunities to learn more about yourself first, because who you are impacts how you lead other people, and learn about your leadership style, and what your weaknesses and what your strengths are. Because when you take that opportunity of learning and self-development and you're walking that path, it makes it much easier for you to empathize and put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're managing and leading, because chances are you are trying to do the same for them, which is lead and develop and grow. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity I got to do. I'm not sure if we're allowed to mention names of the courses I've done, but Lominger's and Hogan's, which do the personality tests, and Myers-Briggs. I just say anybody who gets the opportunity to jump and learn these things yourself, you don't necessarily need to wait for your employer to do that for you. I think just investing in leadership, learning about it, the science behind it, the science behind people work, in the long run, is standing on the back of 2,000-3,000 years of learning and understanding the way that people work and how we can continually improve and get better. That was a mouthful, sorry.
It's completely fine. And I guess finally, the question that we always round off with is, what's one thing that you would advise your younger self?
Yeah, so I loved it when you asked me this first time, or prepped me that potentially I might be asked this question. And it caught me on the hop because I hadn't really given it a lot of thought for a long time. So I'm 48 now, and I'm glad that you asked. So my path from probably 18 to 30s, or 27 when I started having my first child, was a path of carrying a lot of the baggage that came from my childhood with me, and a lot of anger and resentment at my birth father, who I've not met, and that anger and resentment and frustration, I think, forces you to make snap decisions sometimes that if you were in a more calmer frame of mind, you'd understand the consequences about what you're doing, and you'd give it a little bit more forethought. So I would tell my younger self that you're going to have to walk this path of self-discovery and self-learning, and you're going to learn things along the way, and it's going to be easier to learn and take that on board, and you're going to make more informed and better choices if you don't carry around a lot of anger and resentment for things that happened to you in your past, because they don't help you in your future. They got to you where you are, and I think a lot of the adversity and the things that happened to me made me a better leader, but being angry and resentful never did make me a better leader. So that's something I can leave behind. So leave behind things you don't need to carry with you would be my advice to myself.
Great. Is there anywhere that people can find you?
LinkedIn is primarily the social media of my choice. I do have a website, byleesampson.com, which is byleesampson.com, but it might be in the links. And yeah, LinkedIn, pop me a message. I'd love to hear from anyone.
Great. So thank you all for listening, and thank you very much, Lee, for that inspiring conversation. You've all just listened to a better conversation, and we hope to see you next time.